Good evening. I'm your host, Karen Hudis. This show is a series that has been coming to you from DCTV since 2015 in a weekly program called The Network of Global Corporate Control. Today's program is called Next Steps in the Global Currency Reset. Thank you to DCTV and Carmen Stanley, studio producer. Carmen gets the job done without fanfare. Aliyah Jamari is our floor director today. I also want to give a special thanks to Control6, who has volunteered to help us again today on audio and prompter. Last week, we discussed what the next steps are and why we're ready for them. The next step is for the people who understand what is really going on in the world and I to discuss how we are going to end the corruption in the world's money system. Enough people understand what I'm talking about so that we can take these next steps. We've been fighting this corruption for a long time. I'm going to provide enough background today so that the newbies understand. I give proof for everything I tell you and answer your questions. The proof is in the archives to this series. Don't be confused by my low profile, whether I'm representing you and everybody else. We are all in this together. I included a Press TV interview about the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank in an earlier draft of this teleprompter. The Banking Cartel broke this link on Press TV's website the day I forwarded it to DCTV. Now I'll simply include a different interview with Press TV. And I guess we can begin the roll-in now, Carmen, please.
Your note you're mentioning.
Well, I can tell you that the Jesuits have a very strong stranglehold on China as well, but I can also tell you that the transition of economic strength from the Western countries to the East is going to happen, but it's going to happen in a smooth way. It's not going to be a transition through a currency war like that terrible corrupt group is trying to manipulate everyone into. No, we're going to have a peaceful power transition this time around. We're not going to have World War III. They tried to pull it off in Syria. They're now thinking they can pull it off in Iran. It's not happening. The citizens of the world see what they're doing, and we're not letting them get away with it this time.
Now, you first blew the whistle over corruption in the World Bank. Tell us more about your revelations.
Well, that's actually what happened. I was working in the Philippines, and there was a bank. This was at the end of the East Asia financial crisis in the end of the 1990s. And the second largest bank in the Philippines, Philippine National Bank, there was a loan to strengthen the banking sector. And what happened was a man who owned Philippine Airlines, Lucio Tan, ended up buying more than 10% of the shares of Philippine National Bank without informing the securities authorities in the Philippines. That was against the law. And then I told the person who was in charge of the World Bank lending program that they should tell the government of the Philippines that the conditions of the loan were not going to be met. And instead, I was reassigned, and I didn't accept that. So I went to the meeting where it was decided whether or not to disperse the loan. And I said that the board was not being informed that the conditions weren't met. And then what happened was the loan wasn't dispersed, but the people who had their money on deposit in that bank withdrew their money, and the Philippine Deposit Insurance Corporation had to withdraw, had to back up the bank for $500 million. And then we didn't disperse our loan for $200 million, and the Japanese didn't disperse their loan for $200 million. So that was $900 million worth of poor loan performance. And when the evaluation department in the World Bank said that the World Bank had performed satisfactorily, I corrected that report, and my correction was never given to the board. So that was a cover-up. And I just, you can't have cover-up in a bank. That shows that money is going the wrong way. And I've been working together with other whistleblowers at the World Bank because we know that the board has to be informed about what's actually going on. Other whistleblowers have reported double accounting. We've reported this to the UK Parliament. I reported it to the European Parliament in 2011, and the European Parliament wrote a letter to the World Bank. I had a very detailed chronology, and the World Bank never responded.
If you look at the original purpose of the IMF, it was for payments, for stability of payments. What happened after 1944 was that the United States dollar was decoupled from the gold. So it used to be that you could go into the U.S. Treasury and exchange dollars for gold. And in 1971, Nixon suspended that. So what we have now got is we have got a system of paper currency which always fails. Now, I was hired into the World Bank by Dr. Ibrahim Shihada, who had been the general counsel of the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries. And I have maintained credibility with the ministers of finance who have appointed me to exercise their function in distributing the world's wealth to the world's people. If you look at what's going to be happening with the International Monetary Fund, they are going to return to their original purpose, and the state capture of the banking institutions is going to end. Let's talk about the existing income inequality. The 85 richest people own as much wealth as 3.5 billion people. And 0.7% of the most wealthy, they have 40% of the world's wealth. And the 3% of the assets are owned by 70% of the people. Now, this is the income inequality that is existing. This has come into effect because the bankers have been printing currency and purchasing these assets and charging usury. Unfortunately, what happened was the World Bank and International Monetary Fund were hijacked by the bankers, the banking institutions. The International Monetary Fund and the World Bank have been dominated by the banking cartel. The banking cartel has ignored the underlying articles of the World Bank and IMF. And instead of the international monetary system being governed by the Bretton Woods institutions, they've been governed by the Group of 20, which has absolutely no legal
The BRICS Post
basis.
broke the link to my interview with Press TV on their article about the Asia Infrastructure Investment Bank. It was working until I tweeted it. Another link to Press TV's interview will be in the teleprompter, and Nestor Aguilar said, "This is only what's left in the comments section that's the BRICS Post. Glad to hear you interviewed Miss Karen Hudes and are aware of her important work." And also, there was a top mention on Twitter Analytics. Nestor had tweeted an updated link to a tweet. This point is brought to you by the Banking Cartel. The Banking Cartel removed a document showing that the United States Congress has declared a state of emergency, suspending the Constitution. That was a stupid thing for the Banking Cartel to do because the Senate report can be viewed on Internet archives. This report says, quote, "This vast range of powers taken together confer enough authority to rule the country without reference to normal constitutional processes." That's the end of the quote. The Banking Cartel has usurped the governments of the world by turning them into a corporation that's owned by the Banking Cartel. Because this is true, there are other links showing that the United States Congress suspended the Constitution by declaring a state of emergency. This is after the Constitution was suspended during the Civil War. Another document showing that the United States Congress has declared a state of emergency, suspending the Constitution, is in the teleprompter. The Banking Cartel broke the link to my tweet telling you about this, and so I reset the link and uploaded information again, and of course I'm telling this to you. I'll give you the tweet at the end of the teleprompter so you can see it in writing. I've also published former Congressman James Trafficant's statement calling attention to the declaration of bankruptcy in the Federal Register. The United States federal government exists in name only, as the Banking Cartel declared the United States bankrupt in 1933. I published the statement of James Trafficant, and you can also see the link to that in the teleprompter. Trafficant said, "It's an established fact that the United States federal government has been dissolved by the Emergency Banking Act on the 9th of March, 1933. And the reference to the public law is in the teleprompter. It was declared by President Roosevelt being bankrupt and insolvent, and then the cites to the law are in the teleprompter. 2 weeks ago, I reminded you that the United States Constitution was not in effect. What does this mean? It means that the Electoral College was not able to elect Donald Trump as the legitimate President of the United States. That explains why Donald Trump has not been able to reply to my true statement that Donald Trump is not the Commander-in-Chief of the United States. I'm working with a coalition of the world's military powers. That is why I'm allowed to say that Trump is not Commander-in-Chief of the United States. Then a blogger called Technowitty called the question by tweeting both me and Donald Trump. And he said, "The Fed is bankrupt. You know it. We all do. Put an end to it. Respond." Yes, I'm a private citizen and you serve us. Respond. So I responded, replying to Technowitty and to the real Donald Trump. Yes, I serve you along with the rest of humanity. We will continue to discuss next steps. And then I put a picture in my tweet which said, like a surfer, I have to wait for the wave to catch it. The wave is people demanding their gold. Note how Donald Trump remained silent when I said that he was not the Commander-in-Chief of the United States, pointing out how his silence demonstrates that he is powerless to object. If people want to move to a moneyless world like Ubuntu is advocating, they can do this when all of humanity has cleaned the corrupt world money system. How do I know this? From working with the world's military powers, who are not going to surrender by allowing the fake paper money system, that's called fractional reserve fiat currencies, to crash. If anyone doubts that I'm working with a coalition of the world's military powers, they need to ask themselves why nothing bad happened to me when I said that Donald Trump was not the Commander-in-Chief of the United States. And then a blogger named Audrey Contreras said, "We understand your role in our lives, and we have been very patient. I believe that we cannot wait any longer since Mr. Trump is demonstrating that it's out of his power to control the United States to pacify the world. In a contrary way, this man is trying to start a great war. The Lord thinks he is the owner of humanity, and we are exposed to much suffering if the situation continues in the current direction. We aggravate all your efforts, but time seems to be over for humanity. We hope for better news in your next video. Best regards." And so I told Audrey Contreras that I would get back to her. What I just said about Donald Trump's not being the Commander-in-Chief has greatly undermined Trump's credibility and his authority with the U.S. military. You say that Donald Trump is trying to start a great war. That is certainly what the banking cartel wants in order to interrupt the global currency reset. The global debt facility contains over $2 quadrillion in bonds that are owed by the banking cartel. In the global currency reset, we're winding down the banking cartel and cutting off interest payments on country debt. It's the banking cartel that owes us money, not vice versa. In the global currency reset, we're winding the banking cartel down because it's bankrupt. The banking cartel's agent, Donald Trump, is also bankrupt under a commercial lien because he's harming me with his lies. There are a lot of distractions playing out on the world stage right now. It's not a coincidence because what we're doing together right now is very threatening to the banking cartel. The banking cartel owns just about all the news outlets. That's how the banking cartel can give you fake news and can try to hide reality from you. What we're talking about today is reality, and what you're hearing in the news has been orchestrated by the banking cartel to create World War III. There are enough people in the world's military powers who know this fact to keep us out of World War III. I'm basing this statement on a very accurate power transition model. The political scientist who developed this model for the United States National War College brought this model to the World Bank in 2004. At that time, Jacek Kugler demonstrated for the World Bank in Ghana, where I was then the country lawyer, how the National War College's model works. It's 90 to 95% accurate. Jacek also told me that we had 5 years to prevent World War III from starting in the Middle East. World War III was supposed to start in Syria. I've been defusing the banking cartel's attempt to start World War III in Syria by showing you that what's really going on in Syria is all about gas pipelines and not about gas. I've been back in touch with the Department of Defense about their power transition model. I discussed this model with then Senator Chuck Hagel. We're now working from this model to prevent World War III, and the chances we succeed are over 90%. I'm using the National War College's model as a blueprint. How? The United States has defense treaties with Japan and Germany, and these countries expect the United States military to honor their commitments to keep us all out of World War III. The banking cartel is taking the National War College's power transition model very seriously because of the model's 90 to 95% accuracy. The banking cartel, through its sock puppet, Brown Noise, is trying to argue that the power transition model is not reliable and doesn't work. Wrong, banking cartel. The power transition model works. I want to remind you how I work. I follow and take directions from humanity. I have a track record that should reassure you of this very point. In 2009, when Svein Aas, who was then Norway's executive director, and Eugene Myakov, who was then assistant executive director for Russia, appointed me as acting general counsel of the World Bank, I reassured them that I work with the World Bank's Board of Governors. I repeated this to another Russian woman who wanted to check me out during a panel at a think tank some time ago. I keep various crooks from stealing the wealth of the world and the world's monetary gold reserves that were put in a trust for humanity called the Global Debt Facility at the end of World War II. My job is called Overseer Mandate Trustee of the Global Debt Facility. The World Bank and International Monetary Fund were created by Jose Rizal and Ferdinand Marcos to manage the Global Debt Facility. Nestor Aguilar, in replying to a blogger named Netboy Rick, really proof that the Global Debt Facility, also known as the Global Collateral Accounts, it's true. Those who want to steal the gold are on the links below, and you can see those links in the teleprompter. That was the International Court of Justice, the CIA, and Badre from the World Bank Secretariat, which was controlled and captured by the network of global corporate control. And this network was identified by Vitali Glatfelder and Battiston of ETH Zurich, that's a university in Switzerland. And then we're scrolling through the links for the International Court of Justice and for the CIA and for Bertrand Badre. I let everyone know in this series and also in my social media what's going on and what to expect. Sometimes YouTube erases your comments in our archives. The Banking Cartel and its agents are going to try to interfere with our communications for a while. We're going to continue to tune out the Banking Cartel and its agents and its sock puppets. As time goes by, the interference from the Banking Cartel is going to decrease. In the meantime, if your comment on YouTube disappears, you can send me an email, and the email is in the teleprompter. You can also use the contact page on my website. The Banking Cartel hacked into my website last week. When I asked people to let me know if they were having difficulties accessing my website, the Banking Cartel reversed their hackers. Sometimes YouTube lowers the sound. Then I just post the video on Internet Archive. And a blogger said that I was a beautiful person and that they admired me and respected me. And this is because I risked my life for the people, and the blogger thought that made me a national hero. But if you don't turn up the volume, I can't watch, period. The only part that's loud enough is, and then the blogger didn't like our theme song, and they asked me when I'm going to eliminate it. The reason they don't like it is because it reminded them of Neil-Lehrer report, and all those people are members of the CFR, that's the Council on Foreign Relations. They're part of the evil control group that wants to enslave the world. And the blogger said further, who told you that mimicking them was a good idea? Just open with a close-up smile and say warmly, I'm Karen Hudes, then start reading. And my response was, thank you for the suggestion. I'm sorry you don't like my opening. I'm working with a team at DCTV, and this is how our team thinks we need to begin. By this time, after more than 3 years on air, people recognize our theme song. As for the volume, we're being sabotaged by YouTube. I'll try and post the videos on another site with better sound as well. And that's what I did, and Nestor put the link up. And it turned out on Twitter Analytics that people liked that, and it was a popular blog. Just one more piece of background information to put what we're doing into perspective, and then we can continue discussing the global currency reset. I'll continue to respond to the issues you all have raised in next week's segment. We're pre-recording that segment today after this live broadcast. I want to share some advice that Rick Lewis gave me a couple of years ago, and which is even more relevant today than when he gave it. Hi, Karen. Sounds like a lot of pressure on you to make a decision for humanity. I have to say, there's a pressure building everywhere, and a lot are turning to you for answers, and of course, the determined resistance build. You continue to show great courage and determination to follow your path. Perhaps the level of fear-mongering that appears to be a constant is heightening, and in turn, raising anxiety for all, along with other world events, elections, etc., that try swaying public views and, more importantly, division. This has a direct bearing on energy levels that promotes uncertainty. Have felt this myself with so many decisions made for us. Feelings of hope can be replaced by urgency for someone to fix it. Lack of information in the mainstream media, which is the norm for most, promotes distrust and questions. These aren't new thoughts, although with the idea that your efforts are coming to fruition, the stepping up of historical practices to divide and conquer will also be rising. I believe, as you do, the hope rests with the people of the world and the humanity that is inside, masked by the fear and greed that's manipulated by the few. Let's all be honest about responsibility and support the efforts that have given us hope for change. Keep the faith. What is the next step? We discuss, and that's, by the way, the end of the blogger statement. We're going to discuss issues that need to be decided in the global currency reset. One of the questions that will have to be decided is how deep does the overhaul of the world's international financial system have to be? Right now, it's very convenient to make a purchase with a credit card. If we keep that system intact, there's not going to be any way to end the corruption. I'm thinking that we need to go just as deep as the corruption is to root it out. Do people agree? When you consider this question, remember that there are going to be a lot of alternatives with local currencies. The local merchants are certainly able to decide whether the purchases in the local communities with the local currencies are going to be with some form of credit and debt. This is just one example of the kind of issues we're going to be discussing. The next step is going to be an ongoing dialogue about what the global currency reset is going to be like. This is not a conversation that the banking cartel wants us to have. It's the kind of conversation that the banking cartel's sock puppets are guaranteed to want to gum up. During the early stages of the global currency reset, YouTube, because of its accessibility, seems to be the best way for us to discuss the global currency reset. The global currency reset remains a work in progress. This is a project for all of humanity, and we're going to manage. How do I know this? Based on the conversations I have with we the people. I recently learned about the special role of the hippocampus. Humanity possesses many hidden abilities. According to my source on the hippocampus, quote, we are transcendent beings, close quote. In other words, we have many talents and capabilities that are going to stand us in good stead during the global currency reset. And then we're scrolling quickly through the rest of the teleprompter to get to the close because we're running out of time. One of the things that I was going to be discussing is answering the question whether it was a good idea to buy gold to liquidate your savings in the bank. And the answer that I give is that I'm expecting we're going to have a smooth transition, but you can certainly use gold as insurance. And this is your own decision to make. I'm not an investment advisor. Then there's also something about a journalist in Denmark who was asking me to prove who I was. And you can see in the teleprompter what I said to that doubting Thomas. Of course, I'm using World Bank letterhead when I write, and nobody's stopping me from doing that. That's another source of proof. I want to thank you for listening to this segment, and we're going to be continuing to answer your questions next week. Stay tuned for the next session. Thank you very much.
Your note you're mentioning.